Okay, folks, so we've chatted about tool support quite a bit throughout the various topics in this module. The point of this presentation is kind of to bring all that material together and just have a chat about how tools can be used to support the testing process across the spectrum of testing activities. So, tools can be used in lots of different ways for testing activities. They can be used directly in testing activities themselves for helping with execution, for generating test data, for allowing us to automatically compare expected and actual outcomes. They can assist with the management of testing activities, so test scheduling, automation of tests with the reporting of incidents and defects, and also for monitoring the progress of test execution as well. They can be useful for looking at how a piece of software actually interacts with the surrounding environment, like some monitoring file activities. In a nutshell, it can be any tool that aids testing, and this can be down to the likes of a spreadsheet there, or even spelling and grammar checkers in Microsoft Word if it's used in the context of testing activities, could be described as a test support tool. Why do we use them? Well, the short and sweet answer is to make our lives a little bit easier. A slightly more technical definition, I suppose, would be to reduce the amount of resource and or the amount of time needed to effectively conduct testing activities. So, let's break that down. So, automation of repetitive tasks. People tend to be very bad at doing the same task over and over and over again. They get bored, and it's quite easy for mistakes to creep in there as well. So tools allow us to automate those repetitive tasks. As I've mentioned, there is the opportunity of human error. We have a very repetitive task, or even if the task is done, but it may be done a slightly different way each time. So with an automated tool, we can enforce consistency each and every time a task is executed. Tools also allow us to get an objective measure of system quality or complexity of the application. We can measure things like the number of lines of code, the number of decisions taken, so we're able to come up with facts and figures to describe the complexity, the quality of a piece of software, rather than just saying, you know, it looks good to me. Can be very objective. As I've mentioned, obviously we're aiming to improve the performance of the testing process as well. And in some cases there are some testing activities that we physically can't do by hand. We do need to have some sort of software tool to do that, and obviously those fall under tool support as well. So we have different types of testing tools. I'm going to start at the bottom. Some of them are very developer focused. I believe you started playing around a little bit with the likes of JUnit testing, and there's Sonar we'll have a little bit of a look at later on, but very much the developer focused tools. We can have other tools that described by ISTQB as probe effect tools. So there we can have a look at, for example, performance testing, how something performs under a certain weight, or look at file read and writes executions. But very much probe effect and developer focused tools are the two we are concerned with for this module. So regardless of the service that a tools support software is trying to offer us, we can get all sorts of different tools that can be used across all the different testing activities throughout the software development life cycle. So starting with test management tools, it's all about providing an interface or a service to a user to execute tests, track defects, looking at the management of requirements, seeing what's been done, importantly, quantitative or objective analysis and reporting as well of quality or complexity and other measures. So, test management tools, as I said, they can apply throughout the software development lifecycle. You get a few specialized forms. Handiest thing we did here is just if you want to have a look at a few examples, there's a little link you can follow there, and you can read up on some of the pieces of software and what they offer. Start to look at some more specific pieces of automated tool software though. We have requirement management tools, so these can be quite useful in terms of requirements for identifying priorities, for making sure that every requirement has a unique identifier. Allows us to also map from requirements into individual tests as well. I know a few of you find that quite tricky in terms of the assignment, so there is automated tools out there that can help us with that. Thinking back to our first assignment as well, identifying inconsistent or missing requirements, we can have some tool automation to help us with that as well. We're not just relying solely on human reviews, we can get a bit of automated support. So looking ahead now to incident management tools, so anything where we have a difference between our anticipated and our expected result, we need to raise an incident and resolve that through either by resolving the incident or resolving it as a defect. There's lots of software there to help us with it as well. Bugzilla is probably the most popular one in the open source world these days, but there's other options there as well. Configuration management tools doesn't quite fall under the testing umbrella, but it's still worth mentioning. If we think about our environmental testing, for example, making sure that the likes of the QUZ website works effectively in various mobile environments and various desktop environments, we need to have those pre-configurations ready and loaded so we can actually run those tests against them. And configuration tools allow us to automate much of that. So not just used in testing, but a really handy thing to use with testing as well. Makes very heavy use of virtual environments, virtual machines, etc. So taking up more of a focus on the static testing side of things now. So we're not doing dynamic testing. This could be done on documentation, or we have a piece of code. So as we know, static testing, it's early stage testing. It's a good way of finding defects at a relatively low cost. So all we're saying here is there's tools to help us with that. It could be as simple as a spelling and grammar checker in Word for requirement specs. It could be the ability to host review meetings online for the likes of Skype or similar services. Taking a slightly more code-focused look, before we actually execute code, we have the static analysis tools, the code checkers. So we've seen in the clips we have the red underline where we've made some syntax errors before the code's executed. All of those kind of things get bundled up under this idea of tool support for static testing. So any piece of software that helps us prior to code execution comes under this umbrella. So I mentioned earlier this piece of software called Sonar. Here's an example screenshot, and you can see some of the objective measures it's able to give us in terms of code complexity. So at its simplest level, we've got the likes of the number of lines of code or the number of classes represented, and it breaks it down to some more sub-statistics. It looks at how comprehensive our commenting is throughout all of our classes. We get some measures of complexity as well. The top right here, we're looking at adherence to coding standards, so we can see a number of violations and what our total rule compliance is. We can actually look at our statement and decision coverage testing. We can see those coverage statistics being represented there. So a nice dashboard or cockpit, if you will, that gives us a solid report, an objective report on the complexity, and we can link in some testing statistics there as well. Sonar's one example. There's a number of other ones out there, but I think you can see quite clearly the benefits a piece of software like that can offer to save us having to actually go through and count it all up ourselves. So to summarize some of the different tools we have. So we have the text execution tools. So we did a lot of manual testing through this module. Obviously, you know, the drawbacks of that one there, it takes a lot of time and it's easy to make mistakes. We can actually automate a lot of that, so it'll be very easy to run 100 test cases against 20 different environments, because for the user it's just clicking a button. One of the most popular pieces of software to achieve this is one called Selenium. It's open source, freely downloadable. It operates heavily in Java, so something you may wish to have a play with. JUnit testing, I'll not drill into this one anymore. I know you're covering that as part of your programming, but again, very good for test automation. You can do your test comparisons, so we can actually look at a data file, for example, and make sure a piece of software is processing it correctly. We've got our coverage measurement tools, we've mentioned those briefly, and then of course security testing. So things like ensuring password complexity rules are being met, making sure we can log in with valid credentials, so on and so forth. Other tools we have is dynamic analysis tools. So we've talked very much this idea of static testing, we can find problems early, and then dynamic testing, we can run tests. But I think it's important to mention that some defects can only be found whenever a piece of code is running. For example, memory leaks, a constant resource that's never closed and is actually using up resources. The performance of a website or an application can never be determined until it's running either. So the likes of load and stress testing, JMeter's a handy application to have a look at for that. And then of course just monitoring tools that will sort of constantly keep an eye on the performance of an application to make sure that it's meeting its various performance measures. They come under this idea of tool support as well. Little example screenshot from JMeter there. It might be a good idea just to open the slide up in PowerPoint and have a closer look, but you can see it's a lot of the sort of typical statistics we've mentioned already. Okay, so with tool support we can see that there's a lot of benefits. They can make our life a lot easier, but only if they're adopted and utilized correctly. There's quite often what's seen as an invisible risk associated with tools, and they can actually reduce the effectiveness of testing an organization if the right tool isn't identified or if the tool isn't used in the correct way. So first off is unrealistic expectations. A lot of organizations think buying in some automated testing tools will have some automatic and immediate benefits. Well, in some cases that's true, but quite often it takes longer to get a piece of software up and running and actually paying dividends back into the testing process than initially expected, and a lot of people are under the impression that they will make their life a lot easier than it actually is. Remember, tools will support the testing process. They don't replace it. It still requires a good amount of human effort to have an effective testing process in most test cases. As I briefly alluded to there, the initial time, cost and effort whenever you first bring a tool in, your workload is probably going to increase before it decreases as you get used to using this particular tool, as you double up on your testing activities to make sure that the testing tool is actually detecting the same if not more defects or otherwise. Understanding the effort required to maintain the test assets. So we've mentioned before that we could write a number of test cases that could be automated, but those test cases will need constantly reviewed and updated as the software evolves and changes. So there's time required to actually maintain those testing assets. There can also become a sense of over-reliance on the tool itself. So the idea is, yes, it can reduce manual testing, but in some cases manual testing is the only option and there isn't a software tool out there to help. So bearing that in mind is important as well. If you buy a software testing tool in from another organization, what happens if they go bust? If suddenly the tool stops getting supported, updates aren't being released, the tool can become over time unusable. And then of course you're relying on vendor support as well. So if this particular testing tool is critical to your project lifecycle, and if it goes down, does that cause big issues for your project? You've got to be careful about being tied into that vendor support. If you don't have the support there and reliable, then you're going to have issues, and that's particularly a problem for open source tools where there maybe isn't the same commercial support available for it. So how do you introduce a tool into an organization? Well, first of all, you need to pick the right tool for the job. So some things to think about. Is your organization actually ready for this tool to come in? Do you have an established testing process? Do you know what it is you need to test, how long it takes you to test it, where the problems there, where the bottlenecks in the testing process are that a tool can come in and help with? So you need to have a good understanding of your testing culture, for lack of a better way of putting it. Same as any project, once you have that understanding, you need to benchmark the tool against a predefined list of requirements to make sure the tools that you're considering will actually address the underlying problem. And then we don't go for big bang integration. You don't just buy the tool and say, right, that's what we're going to run with. You need to run a proof of concept, so get the tool in, maybe on a trial basis, test it in a small way against some projects and see if it is actually going to address the problem as well. Don't just buy the tool in, replace all your testing activities straight away and hope that it's going to work. So final point then is just the evaluation of the vendor. Are they going to be able to provide the service level that you need to support the testing activities? Are they going to train you on how to use this tool, or do you need to source your own training as well? And what other support are they going to make available as well? So number of very important points before you actually pick a tool to bring in. Other points to consider there in selection of tool is the testing team. What training are they going to need to be able to adopt this? Considering the initial additional outlay of getting this tool in, of all the training, of all the process changes you need to do, what is the overall cost benefit ratio. I mean, is this tool actually going to save the organization time and or money in the long run? Answer isn't always yes. And then identifying any internal requirements for mentoring and use of the tool. Just because one team thinks, yes, buying this tool is going to make our life a lot easier, if you've got 20 testing teams, it's a bit of a problem if you have different teams testing in different ways. So you need to make sure you have a mentor, a champion there that's going to drive the use of this tool throughout the relevant teams. So we've mentioned briefly there that when we do identify a suitable piece of software, we want to get it in on a trial basis and make sure it's going to work. So the key things we're looking at there is learning more about the tool. We've probably read the blurb, maybe had a bit of a demonstration from the vendors on the tool, but now that you're in, you can get hands-on with it, learn as much as you can about the tool and evaluate how the tool fits into the existing process. Every organization has its own testing processes. These can even be different depending on the context of the different projects ongoing in that organization. So how well will this tool actually integrate with all the different management styles that you have in an organization? And then ultimately assess whether the reported benefits of this tool can actually be achieved at all, and if they can be achieved, making sure the cost benefit ratio is on the right side so that it's actually going to save time and or money to the organization. So what are the factors in making sure a tool is going to be a success? So incremental rolling out of the tool. No big bang. Big bang is bad. Expecting everybody to change at once is just going to be absolute chaos. So small project, low risk, bring the tool out and then roll out through the other teams incrementally as people get used and accept the tool and start to understand the benefits that it offers. Adapting and improving the existing processes to fit with the tool. It's going to be very unusual that a tool will be able to come in and fit seamlessly into an existing workflow. There's going to have to be some changes, sometimes major changes to adapt to that tool. So making sure that people accept that that's going to happen and facilitating that process as much as can be done. One thing that can help with that is defining usage guidelines and providing training. From a management perspective, monitoring the use of the tool and the benefit it offers. So you may have 2 or 3 employees that are absolutely raving about this tool, love it, but if you've got a testing team of 300 and you're the only ones using it, then that's going to be important information for deciding whether this tool will stay or go ultimately. So monitoring the tool's use and the benefits it's actually affording the testing teams. Supporting the test teams, so understanding that in the early stages that productivity may actually go down while teams adapt to the tool itself, and learning lessons from other teams as well. So it's all about knowledge discovery and knowledge sharing. If one team learns a new and exciting way to use this tool, it's going to save a lot of time, then make sure that knowledge is spread throughout the other teams that are using the tool. Likewise, if we find something the tool does that doesn't work well for a particular team, making sure that knowledge is shared as well so everybody's making the best use of this new tool coming into the organization. Folks, very brief overview on the use of tools. A few things to think about. The main things to take away from this is the benefits the tool can offer, but balancing that off against the risks that exist, and just having a good idea about the process that you might follow if you want to bring in a new testing tool to an organization, sort of the pitfall